Imagine stepping out of your apartment and walking down a street where towering marble columns stretch into the sky, where senators in crisp togas check messages on sleek tablets, and where high speed rail runs along the same stone roads first paved 2,000 years ago. Above it all, a bronze eagle glints in the sun, the eternal emblem of the Roman Empire. But here's the twist: this isn't a historical reenactment or a theme park. This is the modern world, one that never experienced the collapse of Rome. What would such a world look like? Would we be living in a utopia of engineering marvels and peace, or trapped under the weight of an ancient superpower unwilling to let go? And how would this empire survive the threats that crushed it in our reality? Stay with me until the end, because the last chapter of this timeline will completely change how you see the fall of civilizations. And I've got a twist that will challenge everything you think you know about progress. Chapter 1: The Point of Divergence. Our story begins in the early 5th century CE. In our timeline, the Western Roman Empire was bleeding from 1,000 cuts: economic crisis, political instability, barbarian invasions, and a bloated military budget. But here, something changes. In this alternate timeline, Emperor Theodosius II does something that Roman emperors had long resisted. He decentralizes the empire. Instead of ruling from a single vulnerable capital, he creates a proto-federal system, granting semi-autonomous power to provincial governors, but binding them together under a strict military and economic alliance. Think of it as a networked empire, rather than a fragile central hub. This reform means two key things. First, border provinces like Gaul and Britannia get more control over local defenses, responding to invasions faster. Second, the empire no longer drains its provinces dry to feed Rome itself. Local economies grow stronger, and loyalty to the imperial system deepens. Simultaneously, Theodosius invests heavily in assimilation over annihilation. Instead of treating Germanic tribes as enemies to be crushed, they're integrated into the empire, offered land, citizenship, and positions in the legions in exchange for allegiance. The Huns, faced with a united and well-fed Roman frontier, never pushes far west. The disaster of 410, when Visigoths sacked Rome, never happens. The point of divergence is subtle, but its consequences ripple out like shockwaves. Rome isn't just surviving, it's stabilizing. Chapter 2: The Golden Age that followed. With the empire secure, the next 2 centuries become a 6th, 8th century golden age. Roman cities, many of which in our world fell into ruin, instead flourish. Aqueducts are repaired and expanded, bringing clean water to millions. The great roads of the empire are maintained with precision, enabling trade caravans to move as swiftly as military legions. But perhaps the most profound change is intellectual. Because Rome never collapses, the so-called Dark Ages never arrive in Europe. The libraries of Alexandria, Constantinople, and Rome remain intact, preserving not just Roman law and literature, but Greek science, Egyptian mathematics, and even early Chinese inventions brought west along the Silk Road. By the 700s, Roman engineers are experimenting with steam power, inspired by Hero of Alexandria's Aeolipile, which in our timeline was a novelty toy. In this world, it becomes the seed of industrial technology, 1,000 years early. Religion also takes a different path. Christianity remains dominant, but without the trauma of Rome's fall, it coexists with pagan traditions for longer. The violent religious purges of our history are far less common, and philosophy remains a respected field of study alongside theology. Chapter 3: Rome meets the wider world. By the 9th century, Rome's ambitions turn outward. The empire dominates the Mediterranean, but its trade networks stretch further than ever. Contact with the Tang dynasty in China is strong and steady. Not just silk and spices, but gunpowder, printing techniques, and navigational charts flow into Roman hands centuries before they appear in our history. Rome's navy evolves into a Mediterranean juggernaut, and by the 11th century, Roman fleets are skirting the west coast of Africa, mapping the Atlantic currents. Colonies are founded along the African coast, not as extractive outposts, but as integrated provinces. Culturally, Latin remains the lingua franca of the empire, though regional dialects are tolerated. This balance between unity and diversity prevents the linguistic fragmentation that gave us modern Romance languages. Politically, feudalism never takes root in Europe. The empire's administrative framework, local legates appointed by both the provincial assemblies and the Senate emperor system, ensures no single warlord can rise to power. Chapter 4: The Roman Industrial Renaissance. Here's where things accelerate. By the 13th century, Rome experiences what historians in this timeline call the Industrial Renaissance. The combination of early steam engines, advanced metallurgy, and centuries of uninterrupted trade leads to mechanization on a massive scale. Factories powered by steam appear in major cities like Londinium, Massilia, and Carthago Nova. Roman engineers adapt water mills into hydroelectric prototypes by the 15th century. The architectural style evolves too, still proudly Roman, but incorporating Gothic spires and Eastern domes from its many provinces. And here's the big game changer. By the early 1400s, Rome sends an expedition westward across the Atlantic. This isn't Christopher Columbus in 1492. This is an imperial naval fleet with decades of oceanic navigation experience. They land in the Americas more than half a century early. Rather than conquest by small private ventures, the Americas are incorporated as imperial provinces. Indigenous cultures are integrated, often uneasily, into the Roman system, but the sheer scale of the empire's administrative network prevents the same level of exploitation we saw in our timeline. Midpoint reset: the world under one flag. By the 17th century, the Roman Empire isn't just a Mediterranean power, it's a global empire, with provinces in Africa, the Americas, and Asia. The Pax Romana is no longer a slogan, it's a lived reality for billions. Technological rivalries still exist, but they're not between nations, they're between provinces. Londinium competes with Alexandria on naval engineering. Nova Roma in the Americas pushes innovations in agriculture and shipbuilding. Slavery, still present in earlier centuries, fades earlier than in our world, replaced by mechanized labor and philosophical movements rooted in Stoicism and Christian ethics. If you're enjoying this deep dive into a world where Rome never fell, imagine what we could explore next, from Alexander the Great's empire lasting centuries to a world where World War I never happened. If you want to see those worlds come to life, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss our next journey through history's what-ifs. Now, let's see what happens when Rome enters the modern era. Chapter 5: The Modern Roman Century. The 20th century in this world is almost unrecognizable compared to ours. Without a fractured Europe, there are no world wars. The largest conflicts are provincial rebellions or resource disputes contained by the imperial military machine. The space race begins not as a Cold War competition, but as an imperial prestige project. By the 1960s, Rome lands the first humans on the moon, under the imperial eagle, not the stars and stripes or the hammer and sickle. Global communication is unified early. With Latin as the common administrative language, the internet, developed in the late 20th century, spread seamlessly across provinces. The absence of global-scale war means scientific resources are poured into infrastructure, medicine, and exploration. By the early 21st century, Rome has research colonies on Mars. Chapter 6: Life in the Eternal Empire. Today, what's daily life like under the never-fallen Roman Empire? Imagine walking through a megacity like Nova Roma in South America. Roman aqueducts still carry fresh water, but now they run alongside maglev train lines. The streets are clean, not because of magic, but because centuries of civic law demand it. Education is universal. Every child, whether in Africa, Europe, or the Americas, learns Latin, mathematics, history, and engineering from the same imperial curriculum. Religiously, the empire is diverse. Christianity remains strong, but philosophical revivals of Stoicism and Epicureanism attract followers. Pagan festivals are celebrated as cultural heritage rather than religious obligations. Culturally, the empire blends traditions from across continents. Architecture combines marble colonnades with glass skyscrapers. Cuisine fuses Mediterranean olive oil with New World tomatoes and African spices. Chapter 7: The Price of Eternal Rule. Of course, this Rome isn't a perfect utopia. Political freedom is limited. The Senate-emperor system is stable, but dissent is carefully managed. Provincial autonomy exists, but secession is nearly impossible. Cultural diversity thrives, but political diversity is stifled. Rome's central bureaucracy can be slow to adapt, meaning innovation sometimes has to happen in spite of the system, not because of it. And while war between provinces is rare, the empire still wages wars on its borders. In this case, the edges of space, competing with independent colonies founded outside imperial influence. Chapter 8: Aftermath and Legacy. So, would this world be better than ours? In many ways, yes. Earlier technology, less large scale war, more cultural exchange. But in others, perhaps not. A single empire dominating the world could lead to stagnation, the crushing of dissent, and the loss of unique national identities. Yet one thing is certain. In this world, the shadow of the eagle stretches not just across Europe or the Mediterranean, but across the entire Earth and even beyond into the stars. If you enjoyed this journey into a world where Rome never fell, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss our next alternate history. And if you're ready to keep exploring, click the next video on your screen, where we ask, what if the Cold War turned hot? A story that might just chill you to the bone.